This is the actual sound of the radio emissions from Jupiter.
Well, it's generally free, and you can come right in off the street. It's a very public gallery. You know, you might see somebody who's, you know, a local Cockney bus driver. You might see someone who's come in a mink coat to, you know, collect art. You have to be prepared for that. It's other unique factors. It's very informal, and in the sense of the way we plan exhibitions, and we have a small staff. We're not a museum. There isn't a lot of hierarchy. The curators and the people working on education, or the people managing the building, they're principally artists, and so that they, you know, show a lot of initiative and a lot of independent judgments. It doesn't have the bureaucracy a museum would have. It's also you know, not funded by one wealthy individual, nor is it a local authority. Its funds come partly from the Arts Council, but a lot of it is from money the gallery finds for itself. So it has freedom. You know, it doesn't have a controlling body of trustees. The Whitechapel has a long history of having programs for school children. So every morning, a group from one of the local schools will come to some kind of practical workshop. They're led by artists exclusively. They're workshops for young people. They're also 2 or 3 day courses for older students. There are teachers' previews, which are large social occasions for teachers who come, who book their workshops and learn about the show themselves and meet the artists. We also make a video of each, for each exhibition, and there are usually interviews between artists and critics or curators. There are, in a few moments, there'll be a workshop for disabled people. The gallery will be full of wheelchairs. This is something more likely to happen on Mondays, the day we're closed to the public. The number of, you know, local colleges and not just local, national and international too, came, and they're, you know, the cafe becomes a seminar room. So, you know, a student group will be sitting for 3 hours with their tutors, just talking about what they've seen, mainly in the building, but probably other experiences too. We have films which are free every Wednesday evening. So it's, you know, there are lots of activities. The Whitechapel's had exhibitions since its opening in 1901 of East End artists, but in the late 70s, the artists sort of took over the process, and they began submitting to what we call the Whitechapel Open, where people can send in actual work or slides. It now happens every 2 years, and in the about 7 years ago, at the same time, artists began opening their studios to the public. And it's quite a bizarre event because there's so many artists, about 1,000 open their studios, and another 1,000 apply to the Whitechapel Open. And we keep changing the method by which it's selected. They're usually a combination of people who work in the gallery and outside artists. It's a tricky process. And the main reason the process is tricky is because, as I said before, there are just so many artists living here. 10,000 is apparently the largest concentration in Europe. Sometimes now artists prefer to sort of leapfrog the process and organize their own shows, get their own attention, get their own publicity, find the right agents or collectors or curators to come see their shows by themselves.
特に90年代に入って若い人たちが気軽にグループ展とかを展示できますよね。そういうところがすごくいいなと思うし、エネルギッシュだし、学生なんかでも自分たちで企画して展示したりとかで、デミアハースもやりましたよね。ドッグランツのフリーズっていうグループ展で、あそこに出てた人たちってみんな、あの時は学生でしたけど、今ではすごくもう有名になっちゃいましたけど、あの時はまだ学生で学校で勉強してた人たちがああやってグループ展とかをやって、でそういう場所からギャラリーの人がピックアップしたりとか、そういう傾向がずっと今まで続いてますから、若い力がすごく発揮できる場所だと思いますけど。
Artists who have been renting studios here, this process has been happening for 30 years. The artists first came in the sort of late 60s. And so in a sense, there are 3 generations of artists who've colonized the East End.
We love the East End of London especially because we came here first as students, and it was the only part of London where we could afford to live. It was extremely cheap and extremely run down. It was one big slum.
It was rather exciting. It felt like moving into the 19th century when we first came here. And the streets in the evening were completely dark, and it is the land of Jack the Ripper.
The best thing about this part of London is the mix of people, really. When we first came, it was nearly 100% Jewish, Yiddish-speaking, Hasidic Jews with the big hats and things. Then it became very Maltese for a while, so they all had Alsatian dogs and played cards all day. And then it became Somaliland people came for a while, and then the Bangladesh people came. So it's always changing and always adjusting to the new world. Okay. We think it's the most up-to-date part of the world we've ever been to. It's more typical of the whole of the planet in a way.
There's quite a bit of real solidarity amongst the artists, and I think British artists aren't exclusive just to how famous they are. People who've gone to art school with other artists are quite supportive and generous, so that from the outside maybe only 50 names are known, but on the ground people are having conversations, teaching with, mixing with artists from a lot broader range than that.
卒業してすぐにいろんなところからオファー来て、でいなきゃいけないような場を作ってしまったんですよね。でやっぱり卒業した時にいろいろ迷ったんですけど、どうしようかなって、どっか場所を移ろうかなとか、日本に帰ろうかなとか。でもオファーが来たし、やっぱりいい機会だなと思って、で友達の助けとかもあって、スタジオを借りることもできたし、ですぐに創作活動を続けたから、やっぱりここにしばらくいた方がいいのかなと思って、それで、今に至るんですけど、でもいてよかったと思います。 一般的に日本人とかってやっぱりこっちで住んでると、感情を出さないですよね。日本にいるとまあわからないですけど、特に西洋に住んでると、日本人は顔に出さないとか感情が出ないとかいうふうに言われがちなんですよ。で私もそうなんですよ。でそれってやっぱり自分のものだし自然的なものだから変えることはできないですよね。でそういうことを何か形にして自分を出したいなっていう、そこから来てるんだと思いますけど。
We as artists have always fought mainly for the idea of the new individual, because we think that's the biggest battle of this century, whether we are citizens, whether we are English people, whether we are Japanese, whether we are students. But we think that if we could arrange a way of seeing things differently, we could all get up from our beds in the mornings being a new idea of person. We want a new idea of the individual, really.
We do fight for complexity of life. We want the individual to become more and more complex, and we want more freedoms. I think that's very important. Tolerance is very important for us, because we know that so many places are so intolerant. We feel that very much in art, and there are so many taboos that are still difficult and that we have to fight for.
We think that we're all excessively conventionalized, so that when we get up in the morning and think, what are we going to do today? It is not really us deciding or imagining how that day could be. It is because of the gramophone records your mother listened to. It is because of the sort of school your father went to. It's because of the sort of city you live in. And we think that a more personal idea would be better, really, a much more complicated idea.
Complexity of meaning. And in some way we always fight for a new morality, because the world has to change, no? What used to be good 20 years ago is not so good anymore, and what used to be bad 20 years ago is much better now. So that's what we're fighting for. Culture is changing the attitude of living, because we are inventing ourselves every single day.
The film Why I Never Became a Dancer is 6 minutes long, and it's shot on Super 8 film in Margate, where I grew up. And I just tell a story. I show scenes of Margate, of the coast and the seaside, and I just talk about growing up there, about being a teenager, having sex and my experiences, and about how I entered a dancing competition. And when I got up to dance, a lot of men that I'd had sex with started calling me a slut and a slag and a whore, and how I ran off the dance floor. And that's what makes me leave Margate, leave my hometown. And so that's basically what the film appears to be about. But of course what it's about is like triumph, you know, continuing. And at the end of the film it's actually maybe 3 minutes of me dancing now as an adult. So it's like, you know, someone might call you a slag or a slut, but it doesn't stop you from wanting to have a fuck. Someone might try to destroy your life when you're 14 or tell you can't dance, but it doesn't stop you from wanting to be a dancer. You just have to carry on. And if I'd really just listened to everyone, I wouldn't have carried on. But I just didn't have the same beliefs that they had. People who I mixed with years ago, their idea of art wasn't what my idea of art was, but they thought that my work was bad. Yeah, I go about with different people, yeah. Didn't change what I did.
We think that the sound of the world turning as it rotates endlessly is in fact one of pain. We think the struggle of life is so incredibly intense all over the planet, and we are very, very sensitive to that. We feel that aching hole inside of every person. It is very difficult to justify being alive.
Everybody is trying to improve what life, make it more jolly, make it more happy, that they can survive it. No? But in the reality, behind a closed door, It is a nightmare. And it doesn't matter if you are rich or poor. It's very difficult to live.
We are very keen to organize our life excessively because we always feel that we are all being dragged at ever-increasing speed towards the grave, that life is incredibly short, and we are filled with thousands of pictures which we will never have time to make. So if we reduce the side of our life which is not important, eating, dressing, and the more normal, the more banal parts of life, that will leave us freer, that will leave our brains freer to explore for the viewer.
In fact, we are creating much more time for ourselves to relax and even to do nothing. We prefer to do nothing than to go and buy toilet paper every day. So we are always free to think about art. That's what it's all based on that, to be totally in front of the world, completely empty.
We believe that we are fighters for new, unknown freedoms. We would always like to find new ways to be.
And we like to create an art that when the viewer is in front of it, that he can find himself. He says in front of the picture, I feel like that, I understand this, that's part of me. That's what we want. And together we want to create a more complex world.
I started my museum because I had to find a place to work, for one reason. And the other thing was I felt that there's so many people can go to art galleries, they can see art, but they never actually see the artist making the work. They never really understand where it's coming from, the idea. And so the museum to me is like a halfway point where people can come and meet me and see what I do. And it isn't a gallery environment, it's usually a lot more friendly. It's not very friendly today because I'm in a bad mood though. Well, the disadvantage in having a museum is some days I can have between 40 and 50 people come, and that's just in the afternoon, and I might be very tired, or like today, just very irritable and very tired, and I might not really feel like seeing people, so that can be terrible. But the advantages are that actually, there are no advantages in having my own museum. It's just a lot of hard work, really. But the idea is that it's just one big piece of art. It isn't, you don't come here and just see a few drawings or one thing. It's an evolution over 5 years. It will slowly take shape and form. Well, I do a lot more than have the museum. I mean, I show internationally. I show in big museums, in galleries and different things. So the museum is just all part of my idea of art, really. Being an artist isn't about making something visual which goes into a gallery. Being an artist is a 24-hour-a-day thing. And it's just what you make is the end result from the idea, really.
Commercial Gallery was set up as part of Spitalfields Arts Project by a man called Martin Burroughs, who had originally set up about 80 artist studios at the other end of Spitalfields Market. And I basically had a studio there, and he asked me if I was interested in running the gallery when we got around to opening it. Much as a generic name we give to any external things that we do outside of this space. And that exists as a series of events, sort of mainly buildings that we have temporary use of, so they tend to be short-term projects.
It's really an ironic play on this fact that the gallery is actually situated on Commercial Street, and as an alternative space or an artist-run space, it was quite fun to call it Commercial and Commercial 2, TOO.
Artist-run spaces can very rarely be commercial in any true sense of the word, I think. I mean, it's quite hard for commercial galleries to be commercial, but...
This is specifically non-commercial.
The current commercial too is a former synagogue and Jewish Luncheon Club and Federation of the Offices of Synagogues. And that's been empty for quite a while from fire damage, etc. It's being redeveloped, so we've actually taken the building on before it's redeveloped, basically.
It's really a complementary space as well. We tend to show solo exhibitions at the commercial gallery, although we have done a few group shows here, and then larger installations and group shows at anything outside, so at the commercial 2 sites.
The theory behind the commercial gallery space is that it will ultimately be subsidised by the rest of the project, which is the sound performance venue upstairs and the bars and restaurant next door. But that is very much a theory. We opened the gallery a year before the restaurant and the venue opened, so it was operated on a shoestring. The funding that's come in so far has been through a very small amount of Arts Council lottery funding, which was primarily targeted for the building. We manage, by and large, to cover the costs of each exhibition through selling alcohol at private views, etc. The Greater X Street project, for instance, that we have at the moment, started with an absolutely zero budget. So we tried to cut all of the costs down. It was only possible to do it because we had such a lot of support from the artists who were involving themselves. The fact that the developers of the building allowed us to have that building free of charge. But even the costs of private view cards, stuff like that, were down to beer sales on the first opening and the fact that all of the costs were reduced because of help from artists, musicians, performers, etc. So it's...
we were very lucky.
It's very much a charitable organisation. Yeah. We're attempting to try and get some revenue funding, but it's a long haul. In a sense, it's a very privileged position because the work that we are able to do to try and live financially, although the gallery doesn't actually pay a very good wage or anything, but at least that's actually related to the work that we do as artists ourselves. A lot of other artists don't have that luxury, but I think most artists would recognise the fact that, in a sense, whatever work you're doing financially, you spend a lot of your time, you're still, at the back of your mind, you're still kind of churning over your own work.
Through the work in the gallery, you meet a lot of other artists, and you're talking about ideas all the time. I mean, I've actually worked for a number of years in a non-contemporary gallery situation, whether it's in a bookshop or in the West End, whatever, and I almost felt like I was in a vacuum, and my work was suffering as a result because I never actually was able to feed off what other people were talking about or where my own work was going. And this has been extremely positive, being in this setup, that you do actually meet a lot of people and you do get a chance to thrash out ideas and argue, and that's actually been very, very positive.
In terms of time management, which is the biggest problem, the best way I found of dealing with that is making statements. You say, we are going to do this, and I am going to do that, and once you've said it, you're going to look very stupid if you don't do it. Therefore, you have no choice, and therefore, if you get 3 hours sleep that night, then that's all you get. So, you make a commitment to something, and that's it.